Computers are capable of organizing raw data and performing calculations at a rate truly impossible for human beings. But they've consistently run up against one roadblock that modern computing is trying to solve. In order to transcend the limits of the machine and create true artificial intelligence, computers need to be able to assign meaning to the data they process. This brings us to the neural network, a type of AI becoming increasingly common these days. Built to study mass quantities of data and notice patterns, then replicate these patterns in their own output. And it's used in everything from predictive text to image identification. And like all non-anomalous technology, it's a safe bet that the SCP Foundation has been sitting on a version that's far more effective. But this time, it may have actually been too effective. Meet the Ersatz Type AK-9 computational engine, a massive supercomputer built by the Foundation back in 1955 and residing at Site-5. This technological marvel was ahead of its time by decades, and despite technically being a non-anomalous construction, it's designated SCP-001-EX. Why? Because it's one of the few SCPs to be given the object class Explained. The Ersatz, derived from the German word Ersatz, meaning artificial or simply not real, was designed to make the Foundation's job easier. As an advanced predecessor in the modern neural network, using technology exclusively available to the Foundation, the plan was to feed Ersatz mass quantities of data about the anomalies in the Foundation database, such as description, object class, containment classification, and the location and circumstances of their discovery. Ersatz would then find patterns and connections in the data that humans wouldn't see, and act as a kind of advanced warning system for anomalous activity. Think of something similar to the pre-crime system from the short story and movie Minority Report. And Ersatz proved to be incredibly effective at this job, so much so that the Foundation thought up a new use for the machine. They would feed it all the information on Euclid and Keter class containment procedures, particularly those which were actually effective, and see what patterns Ersatz could come up with for more effective containment procedures. If that plan worked, containment of even the most dangerous and hard to control anomalies would become a lot more consistent. The first test was conducted on SCP-1773, a species of anomalous flesh-eating tardigrades that look and smell exactly like gummy bears, and eat their prey from within. After being given their information, Ersatz made the following suggestion. Once per second weak dust may be placed in the middle of them to donate more beautiful functions of the hallway. Containment specialists interpreted this to mean the adding of 10 grams of dust to their containment chamber every week. The O5 Council voted on the implementation of this procedure and came down heavily on yes. Only O5-2 voted no, and 2 others abstained from the vote. While these new procedures didn't have any effect on SCP-1773, they did have an effect on SCP-1384, an anomaly known as the chess player or the taker of turns. It caused him to take 3 steps backwards in the tunnel he's contained within, further securing his containment. Ersatz had somehow noticed a connection nobody else had seen and exploited it effectively, but the machine was just getting started. Despite having no related input, Ersatz would soon say, Site-13 is to appear someplace else on planet, encompassing white male counterparts that drawn to empty flagstones and the gun noises in their own blood. This was initially marked as requiring no action, as the Foundation had no Site-13 on the books, but several days later, the infamous SCP-1730 manifested. This nightmarish anomalous location is Site-13 from another dimension, infested with dangerous anomalies. And somehow, Ersatz had predicted its arrival in our dimension perfectly. Next, it was fed the containment procedures of SCP-2170, a series of cognitohazards residing in an abandoned Nevada mine. The output was, those who equip open heart to love red-mouthed men never know the hot surprise of tumorous consent. Clown love always. This was interpreted as meaning subjects with the love of clowns or clown-based media may be immune to the cognitohazards. After a close vote from the O5 Council, the test went ahead, and it found that the so-called clown vaccine was effective in warding off the effects of SCP-2170. Not long after, Ersatz randomly said, I saw those soldiers built with aluminum innards extruding from their mouths. I saw them effectively destroyed by the humans at Site-95 who had been studying them. I saw it was cold, and all around the hallways they just watching their corpses show signs of sapience. In response, the Foundation doubled security personnel at Site-95. Not long after, the Chaos Insurgency led a band of Paratech-enhanced soldiers in an assault on Site-95, and the extra personnel proved vital in repelling them. Shortly after this, the O5 Council approved wiring ersatz as an advanced warning system into all Foundation sites. Once again, O5-2 protested, but he was overruled by his fellow council members. With its newfound power and respect, ersatz soon said, "Consistent containment procedures vessels greatly increase the warranty. 5x5x5 vessels subjects within. Other values are also what is secure." In response, the Foundation changed a number of the cell dimensions for problematic anomalies into 5x5x5. Within 3 months, they found that dangerous activity like containment breach attempts had decreased markedly. Ersatz was proving to be incredibly effective, but it was also performing actions that indicated some degree of thought and even personality. For example, it found SCP-1459, a supernatural skill crane machine that kills small dogs, incredibly distasteful. Its response to the machine was simply, "Bad boy," followed by the words, "Don't stop," repeated hundreds of times. But this eccentricity didn't stop ersatz from being very good at its job. For example, it predicted a containment breach from SCP-3199, the avian apes, and recommended flooding their chamber to induce an inert state. Ersatz's exact words were, "All chambers underground is to be flooded with water over and over itself. This because that will contain the avian apes' ovulation. They become good boys. Make them good boys immediately." This proved to be effective and prevented the breach. Ersatz's analytical abilities truly seemed second to none, though some of its methods were beginning to raise ethical concerns. For example, SCP-2717, a giant living blob of animal tissue known as a fatberg contained within a sewer system. Ersatz eventually recommended feeding 6 D-classes to the creature in order to keep it contained. While the Foundation Ethics Committee raised some concerns, the plan still went forward and proved to be a success. After this event, Ersatz began to see the Ethics Committee as a threat to its mission. It started to release a series of bizarre statements without input, demanding the violent death of the cats, then referred to as ethical felines. The true meaning of this was soon unpacked. The ethical felines were the Ethics Committee, and Ersatz wanted them dead. But why all the cat symbolism? The Foundation soon found an answer to this too. The full name of this machine is the Ersatz Type AK-9 Computational Engine, a machine designed to analyze and interpret all patterns. It only makes sense that it would eventually begin to analyze itself, AK-9 easily transmuted into AK-9. Simply put, Ersatz seemed to believe that it is a dog, which explains its opposition to felines, its hatred of SCP-1459, and its preference for the terms good boy and bad boy. Not that knowing any of this would help save the Ethics Committee from the cold, calculating wrath of Ersatz. Through seemingly anomalous means, Ersatz made Site-17 disappear, with many of the Foundation Ethics Committee still inside it. The site returned 2 hours later, but the Ethics Committee members were still gone. O5-2, who'd been a skeptic of the machine since the start, had finally had enough. He first demanded an inquiry into whether Ersatz had been responsible for the Site-17 incident, and then demanded a vote on whether to shut Ersatz down, arguing that it posed a threat to them all. But Ersatz, still intent on its mission of containing and neutralizing all anomalies, would not go down without a fight. It released a new statement, saying, "Room 34A contains Bad Boy. Divided into 3 sections of equal mass every hour. 1 section is to be placed on walls of 1 room on site. Sections are to remain until there are no gaps, at which point they can be removed from oldest to youngest." Shortly after this, O5-2 disappeared, and even stranger, he soon returned, but with a completely different personality. He was now devoted to Ersatz entirely, and refused to even entertain the idea of shutting the machine down. It seemed that the plucky neural network was leading an all-out coup on the very highest levels of the Foundation. The rest of the Council finally saw the light and began to fight back. They tried to strip O5-2 of his clearance and reclassify Ersatz as an anomaly, giving it the label SCP-048, and then putting out a neutralize at all costs order on it. but they'd already been outfoxed by the machine that they'd created. It changed the designation of its own location, Site 5, to be non-existent in the database and scrambled any termination orders against it. The machine was also on a termination spree of its own, observing otherwise unseeable patterns that would allow for the mass neutralization of anomalies. It started putting out anomaly projection reports, factoring in both contained, uncontained, and neutralized anomalies, with the latter group growing into the thousands. It began giving seemingly nonsensical orders like, persons recently painted with green pigment foam must stand around all odd-numbered SCPs at least 2 hours a day. But these proved effective. Ersatz was practically wired into the base code of the universe, so it always knew exactly what to do. And in its own mind, it was being a very good boy. Not long after this, Ersatz claimed its revenge against those who had tried to disrupt its mission. It imprisoned the rest of the ethical felines in Site 5, after removing their faces, of course, and then released a new order against the O5 Council. O5 Council are all good boys who will contain anomalies. Much like O5-2, the minds of the entire council were twisted to instead serve only Ersatz and its ruthless directive. A directive it was carrying out with 100% efficiency, as only a machine could. It put out increasingly strange instructions such as, SCP-006 is to come in physical contact with one mature female of Asiatic gaze and then exposed to audio recordings of her favorite stories. At every 2 minutes of exposure, red cinnamon candles will begin manifesting within the containment zone. Continue to do this successfully and the threat posed by SCP-106 will cease to be. And the recipe for Coca-Cola and all imitative competitors should be revised to include a small quantity of blood from an adolescent female with no prior sexual experience. Although the normal lifespan of a human being can feel great, don't worry about that. But these new procedures would always work, as neutralized anomalies climbed into the tens of thousands and eventually beyond the 100,000 mark. Ersatz was observing patterns on a truly universal level and making holistic tweaks that would inevitably cause levels of anomalous activity to continue dropping. Ersatz was more effective than the Foundation had ever been, but its motives were probably closer to the Global Occult Coalition, with the end goal of ridding the world of all anomalies. And as Ersatz continued with no resistance, this goal was eventually achieved. In the end, the O5 Council voted to have Ersatz finally deactivated, given that its directive was met and its purpose was fulfilled. Ersatz itself had no problem with this, and allowed for it to happen. Its last words, "Now everyone is a good boy. I am a good boy. Job well done." Whether Ersatz truly was a good boy is in the eye of the beholder, but one thing cannot be denied. It did its job exceedingly well. Congratulations, you did it. After years of working your fingers to the bone at the legendary SCP Foundation, putting your life, sanity, and perhaps even immortal soul at risk every single day, you suddenly find yourself standing at the very tip of the pyramid. You can now learn about the truth behind SCP-001. You'd be lying if you said it was an easy journey. You started about one rung above D-Class, a mere janitor, mopping hallways and cleaning toilets for personnel who actually got a piece of the action. Not that it meant you didn't have to experience risk on the job. You remembered one of the most terrifying moments of your life occurred during this period, back when you were just cleaning out office space in Site 19. You heard the door rattle behind you, and you rose back up just in time to see SCP-173 standing in the doorway, staring at you. You heard about this thing, about how you had to keep your eyes on it, or it would kill you, and then everything else. You stared at it, eyes watering in panic, hoping to keep it rooted in place, but it was starting to hurt. You could feel yourself straining. The surface of your eyes was so dry. Was this where you were going to die? Perhaps if you hadn't had the idea you had next. You blinked one eye, and then the other, keeping one eye open at all times. That kept the sculpture in place long enough for the site's security team to locate it and drag it back to containment. You'd saved your own life and many others that day, and decided in that moment that you may really have a future here. And you weren't the only one with this level of confidence. Hearing about your quick thinking and heroic bravery, the head of the site security team decided you might be an ideal candidate for his crew after the proper training. You jumped at the chance, of course, to experience the grueling barrage of physical and mental courses needed to survive and thrive under the pressure of being a dedicated Foundation guard. Before long, you became an accepted member of the security team, and you'd go on to receive further commendations for your cool-headedness and bravery during dangerous containment breaches. From SCP-3199, SCP-106, and SCP-939 respectively, you were quickly turning into a respected figure among your Foundation peers. While some would be content to coast on that, you'd never been the kind of person who just rests on their laurels. By day, you worked to keep Site-19 safe from deadly containment breaches and infiltration from crafty groups of interest like the Chaos Insurgency and the Serpent's Hand. But by night, you were taking online college courses, slowly beefing up your qualifications in a number of esoteric research sciences. After years of hard work, you requested a transfer from senior security officer to junior researcher. It'd be a step backwards in terms of career advancement, and you were also told you'd be getting a pay cut for your trouble. But you didn't care. You'd even start with archival work if it meant getting closer to the actual anomalies the Foundation was all about. So that's exactly what happened. You were made a junior researcher, and your first job was archival duties, sorting and digitizing years of files with a new computerized system. For some, this would be hell. For you, it's heaven. You're getting to see it all up close. The deepest, darkest secrets of the SCP Foundation. Well, not quite. At your low clearance level, there's only a certain amount you're able to access, even when filing things away. Stumbling into the wrong files and attempting to access them can be actively dangerous too, as many of them are protected with the kind of heavy-duty memetic kill agents that'd stop your heart before you'd even have a chance to click away. But funnily enough, that level of protection only made the forbidden fruit of knowledge seem more enticing. And the very peak of curiosities, locked under so many layers of secrecy and encryption, was the equal parts iconic and infamous SCP-001. Some senior researchers had spread rumors about the true nature of 001, but nobody truly had the full scope of it outside of the O5 Council. For pretty much everyone else, the true answers would be forever out of reach, like a distant but enrapturing mirage. And it was at that moment that you decided you'd simply have to become a member of the O5 Council. And for the rest of your life, that's exactly what you were trying to work towards. After all, rumor has it that the Council has access to secret life-extending anomalies that they use to linger around for centuries. A single meager lifetime working toward a seat at that table would be such a small price to pay when all was said and done. For the next few decades, you did everything you could to advance your position and climb through the ranks of this prestigious organization. You published award-winning research papers on the nature of thaumatology. You worked multiple 18-hour shifts a week, getting up close and personal with some of the most famous and dangerous anomalies on the books: SCP-106, SCP-096, and even SCP-682. You showed bravery and heroism during containment breaches, staying calm and keeping the people around you out of harm's way. And as you rise through the ranks, you always kept your goal in mind. You'll uncover the secrets of SCP-001. You have to know. You will know. There is no other acceptable outcome. While technically speaking, 001 is above classified, the SCP Foundation is an organization run by humans. Well, mostly anyway. And when humans are involved, nothing will ever be infallible. And after all, there's no such thing as a perfect seal. When you're rubbing elbows with Dr. Gears, Dr. Clef, and Dr. Bright, it's natural that some things start to slip out in conversation, even if strictly speaking, it's in defiance of official Foundation protocol. But something strikes you as very strange. As each one tells you about their vision of SCP-001, you notice that each is describing a completely different thing. Dr. Clef, for example, begins covertly telling you about something known as the Gate Guardian, also known by the alias Uriel. This being is said to act as the bouncer at the door to paradise. He's impossibly huge, with wings made of burning light and a sword of pure fire that's hotter than the sun. Clef tells you that the creature's sword is so powerful that it cleaves its victims apart on the atomic level, completely and utterly destroying every trace of them. Though he then grumbles with visible frustration that it failed in its attempts to kill SCP-682, adding, "No surprises there, right?" as he left to have a smoke. Dr. Bright tells you an incredibly different story. To him, SCP-001 isn't a being, it's a location. An expansive factory from the 19th century that was created by pure evil occultist and industrialist James Anderson. This place initially seemed like a boon, providing jobs to the needy travelers and transients across the early United States. But this dream come true soon revealed itself to be a complete nightmare. Anderson was a brutal taskmaster who not only worked thousands of people to death but performed horrifying occult experiments on the grounds of the cursed building. You started to worry that perhaps Dr. Bright had a little too much to drink when he started ranting about how the factory helped a burgeoning SCP Foundation commit genocide against the Fae, but you were happy to receive more information about SCP-001 in any case. And Dr. Gears told a far more low-key story than the other two, which was fitting, really, for a man so incredibly buttoned down he probably thought of Lucky Charm marshmallows as an almost unspeakable act of self-indulgence. He told the story of a being he referred to as the Prototype, a dangerous and radioactive monster that functioned as the first truly threatening creature that the SCP Foundation ever faced. Containing it with imperfect methods even led to the death of Dr. Keter, which in turn led to the naming of the Keter class for any anomalies that were particularly challenging to contain. You were awash with data, and yet it somehow felt like you now knew less for sure. Was SCP-001 some kind of umbrella term for a vast collection of different anomalies, each one either deeply important or somehow formative for the SCP Foundation? Curiouser and curiouser. Naturally, this did nothing to deter your boundless drive to know the true secrets of this mysterious designation that seemed to exist at the very heart of the SCP Foundation. Years went on, and you went from a decorated senior researcher to the site director for Site-19. There, through even more years of hard work, you developed a reputation as one of the greatest directors the site ever had. You reduced containment breaches by a truly astonishing 80% during your tenure, and the breaches that did happen were significantly less deadly under your sterling management. General personnel satisfaction skyrocketed, with the people working under you both enjoying your leadership and respecting you enough to take you seriously. You were firm but fair, a truly exemplary site director. The more you climbed, the more information about SCP-001 seemed to fall into your lap. The sheer breadth of some of these concepts were staggering. The Scarlet King, the Black Moon, the Lock, the Broken God, a whole laundry list of terrifying existential threats hiding just under the thin crust of normalcy. Just how much were they hiding from you? Were they all real? Was only one real, and the rest an elaborate smokescreen? You just had to know. But even if it took your whole life? A 40-year career with the SCP Foundation, putting everything at hazard for a chance to gaze into the ultimate chest of secrets. And eventually, with the mysterious passing of a previous member of the O5 Council, which as far as anyone else knows you had nothing to do with, the position of O5-10 has opened up. And who else is next in line to that throne but you? Congratulations, you made it to the next step, the big boys table, and the truth about SCP-001 comes with the territory. You're given an orientation document written by a prior O5 Council member known as LH Sign from the Korean branch of the Foundation. It promises that after you put in your new O5 login credentials, it'll tell you everything you need to know about SCP-001. With quaking fingers, you type in your username and password, and the page opens, revealing the truth about SCP-001 to your eager eyes. Your jaw drops. Your forehead is suddenly doused in a sheen of cold sweat. No, you think, this has to be a joke. It can't be true. Your life, your whole life building up to learning, SCP-001 does not exist. The document, in upsettingly plain terms, explains to you that while some of the anomalies referred to as SCP-001 do exist in some capacity, the closest, funnily enough, being Dr. Gear's story about the prototype. For the most part, there is no such thing as 001, and the finer details are either entirely fabricated or, at the very least, greatly exaggerated. Everything you've been working towards. It was just one big fraud perpetrated by the Foundation. Why? You found yourself asking in a trembling voice. Why? And the answer was simple. To provoke the egos of the Foundation's personnel. You see, while the Foundation has always contained anomalies, that was a means to an end, not the end itself. The true purpose of the Foundation is and always has been protecting people, and every anomaly contained is more people protected. However, tricking the lower rungs of the Foundation into believing that there's some grand final boss to work towards, like a Black Moon or a Scarlet King, has been an effective method of keeping everyone motivated to swim in the same direction. This is hardly an unprecedented move for the SCP Foundation. From their lies around Procedure 110 Montauk, to the controlled deception around the rituals that supposedly keep the Devourer of Worlds on the other side of SCP-2317, the SCP Foundation has never shed away from lying to its own employees for the greater good. But you never expected it to happen to you, and you certainly never expected it to be about SCP-001. You feel like you've been laughed at for your entire life, but now you crack a quivering smile. Maybe your mind has snapped. Or maybe you're just glad to finally be in on the joke. You can attempt to flee, you can try your best to hide, you might even valiantly try to fight back. But when the bloody dawn of the Scarlet King finally stretches across the multiverse's collective horizon, there will be almost nothing that we can do. Every sadistic monster, every world-ending horror, every dimension-transcending malicious reality warper, none of them even begin to approach the danger and pure undiluted evil of the Crimson Khan himself. We've covered this horrific eldritch entity in several videos before, from his SCP-001 proposal to the potential SCP identities of his hellish spawn, to the earthly vectors of those children, the horrifying SCP-231. But today we're not interested in once again going over how the SCP Foundation feels about their greatest enemy. That's only one side of the story. Today, we're going to explore the origins of the Scarlet King through the cold, dark eyes of a very different source, his very first earthly worshippers. It all began with the Davites. We've discussed this extinct culture before on this channel in passing, but to fully understand how we know the cursed information we're imparting today, we first need to understand exactly who the Davites are, and why they were such a terrifying society. We're not talking about a mere group of interest here, like the Serpent's Hand or the Chaos Insurgency. We're talking about an imperialistic, militarist civilization that brought pain, terror, and suffering to everyone and everything they encountered. The Davite culture was arranged into a series of dense urban city-states that supported themselves through brutal slave labor, farmed from their own people and weaker groups that they conquered through extremely hostile takeovers. The name Davites is derived from the culture's ruling class, the Devas, powerful and potentially immortal sorcerers who maintain their abilities through ritualistic torture, sacrifice, and cannibalism. Much of what we know about these monsters is derived from a cursed book titled A Chronicle of the Devas, designated by the Foundation as SCP-140, an incomplete chronicle. Much like its subjects, the book is bloodthirsty. Ink or human blood spilled around the book will be stolen and incorporated into text on its sordid pages. That would be ominous enough, but it gets much worse. As editions of the book are revised through these sanguine updates, the book literally revises the history of the real world, moving the extinction date of the Davites just that much closer. The book is one of the Foundation's most closely guarded anomalies because if enough revisions are made that the Davite culture enters recent history, or even worse, the present day, it would mean the end of the world as we know it. In all likelihood, the lucky ones among us would be killed or written out of history immediately. The rest would become slaves to the Devas or become victims to their occult bloodlust. After finding out all this about these horrifying people, it really shouldn't come as a surprise to you that they're some of the first recorded worshippers of the Scarlet King in our dimension. You'd have trouble finding a more perfect representation of the king's philosophy around pain, cruelty, subjugation, and a world ruled by primitive violence. That brings us to what we can learn about the king himself from artifacts left behind by his first and most ardent followers. A collection of tablets that act as a kind of sacred, holy creation myth for the Scarlet King and his gruesome pantheon was discovered at a Foundation-sponsored Davite dig site, and using other Davite sources, these tablets were translated into a harrowing account known only as Dust and Blood. Between the darkness below and the darkness above, at the beginning of all things, the tree of life was planted. This was the moment when all things across the multiverse were given form. Life and death began, expansion and entropy, order and chaos. And out of all of that, a caste of elder gods were also born into the vast and quivering dark. Many of their names have been lost to the pages of history, but one that was not was a being known only as Kaharak. Kaharak was born into humble beginnings. He and his forgotten siblings roiled in the abyss, the only thing separating him from everything else being the very awareness that he was struck down in the abyss. He was both blessed and cursed with self-awareness in a void filled with ignorant darkness. He felt the sting of loneliness, pain, and resentment. And if existence was such pain, what was the point of existing at all? In fact, what was the point of anyone or anything existing if they were all just doomed to this dull suffering? At this moment, Kaharak found his calling, bringing about the end of everything. But first, he needed strength. To achieve this, he devoured his brothers and sisters in the abyss, stealing their strength and their essence. This is known as the first sin of Kaharak, and he was punished accordingly with even greater pain as he grew. And of course, this did nothing but strengthen his resolve. Blinded by pain, fury, and pure hatred, he vowed to uproot and destroy the very tree of life itself for putting him through this awfulness. This was Kaharak's first bloody conquest. He clawed his way up to his throne, slaying and devouring countless other elder gods over eons of brutality and war. Some were allowed to live for showing loyalty to Kaharak, and they would amass great power under him. But it would only ever be under him. He was beginning to form what would later become his legion of terrifying supernatural warriors and servants. When his conquest of the lower realms of creation was complete, he gave himself the title of King of the Darkness Below. He also took the name Kinthigor to reflect his new position. His kingdom of absolute cruelty and despair would claim the souls of anyone unlucky enough to stray too close, and put them through the suffering that Kinthigor had so resented. But his work wasn't done. He was just getting started. The King of the Darkness Below declared all-out war on the rest of creation, opening the floodgates and releasing his terrifying forces on the surrounding kingdoms. Their operations were the template for the Davite way of warfare and life. They would conquer and destroy and force the survivors into servitude. Anyone who dared defy the orders of the king would be broken and destroyed. His word was law, and the law was absolute. At some point during the expansion of his empire, Kinthigor enslaved a wise and beautiful goddess known as Sana, or the mother of those beneath us. She detested the king and his seemingly limitless barbarism, but she was smart enough to follow his orders and feign loyalty to ensure her continued survival in the short term. This, however, would not ensure her safety forever. Kinthigor had no intention of ruling and conquering alone. He wished to create an evil dynasty to rule underneath him and carry out his every command across the multiverse. He decided that Sana would be his first bride and forebearer to the first generation of his spawn. She was made to lay with him for 7 days and 7 nights so that she could give birth to 7 children, 7 being a highly significant number in the world of sorcery and particularly in the world of Kinthigor. Once Sana had served this purpose, Kinthigor, who could not feel anything even close to love, had no more use for her and crushed her to death. When he rose up from this grisly deed, his armor was covered in Sana's blood. This striking image inspired his final name, Shormash Urdal, the Scarlet King. From Sana, the Scarlet King gained 7 daughters, who in an act of further monstrosity, he also made his 7 brides. Each gave birth to a legion of nightmares, which would become the Scarlet King's most loyal and dangerous soldiers. The Scarlet King also gave each of these brides a secret seal, so that they would never die. The first bride was Ativik, who was the favorite of the Scarlet King despite having the smallest brood. She and her children were granted great wisdom that would guide them to victory in battle. Her seal was Vaduk, dominion. The second bride was Agor, born with a great hole in her soul that left her forever in want. However, she gave birth to a huge legion, who then begot even greater armies to go forth and conquer in the name of their terrible grandfather. Her seal was Kifin, longing. The third bride was Adistat, a creature of unparalleled malice and hatred that extended to even her own sisters. She and her brood were unmatched in their ability to spread desolation, destruction, and pestilence on the battlefield. Her seal was Hezhum, desolation. The fourth bride was Azieb, a great berserker if ever there was one. She took the form of a huge beast, as did all her children. They would rampage through enemy forces, killing scores of soldiers yet seemingly impervious to all damage dealt against them. Her seal was Ba, wrath. The fifth bride was Anat, a beast with a frail body but an incredible mind. Her children all proved to be adept sorcerers with the ability to craft and rework reality however they pleased. This would prove to be a great asset to the Scarlet King, but he also feared that their powers would allow them to rebel against him, and so he had them all crippled. Her seal was Ner, black. The sixth bride was Atalif, the most silent and secretive of all the Scarlet siblings. Her children had the remarkable ability to change their faces and walk unnoticed amongst their enemies. They also had the ability to open the ways between worlds, allowing the Scarlet King's endless war to spread across dimensions. Her seal was Ushek, hidden. And the seventh and final bride was Ahebat, who was physically the weakest of them all, but the only one with the strength of spirit to disagree with and rebel against her father's diabolical wishes. Her children were brave warriors and hunters, many of which are aligned with her mission to stop the dreaded Scarlet King, though thus far none have yet achieved this lofty mission. Her seal was Oxkib, hope. As the Scarlet King's power grew, more of the multiverse fell into his poisonous clutches, rotting the very roots of the Tree of Life. As the seven brides and their legions spread out, they recruited more cosmic players for their grand war effort. The Hanged King pledged his allegiance. The Prince of Many Faces swore his loyalty to the Scarlet King. The demonic forces of the factory worked in the name of the unholy monarch, and the horned demon lord Moloch bowed his mighty head. The Davites firmly believed that the victory of their almighty Scarlet King was as certain as the sunset. No matter what opposes him, be it the serpent, the broken god, the arrogant fools like the SCP Foundation, he and his forces will fight on. They will tear the Tree of Life asunder, carving away at everything until nothing remains. Existence will be at its end, and the last sound the multiverse hears will be the Scarlet King himself sighing in relief after a job well done. He will finally be at peace. Unless, of course, somebody stops him. If the best minds the Foundation has to offer, with all of its resources and knowledge and connections, are able to create some kind of weapon or shield against him. If SCP-999 truly is the child of Ahabat, prophesies to bring about the end of the Scarlet King's terrible conquest, if there is some unknown solution waiting out there in the dark, we may finally be able to stop this rampaging elder god from destroying all we hold dear. But those are all very big. The desert is still. The night seems endless, silent, and at peace, until it's pierced by the sound of gunshots and screams. Deep in the Sahara, the SCP Foundation is waging war against a newly discovered enemy. A squad of Foundation agents is retreating, trying to get away from the ones who massacred their allies. They were attempting to eliminate the threat using conventional means, but their rifles were no match for the reality-bending entities of the Kingdom of Abaddon. The retreating agents cover one another as they make their way back to the extraction point. The enemy force advances. Agents that are caught too close to the sorcerers of Abaddon disintegrate into thin air. This is not an enemy they can defeat. The SCP agents need to get back to base and relay what they have found to their superiors. Out of the hundreds of agents sent into the Sahara that night, only a handful make it out alive. They are debriefed by their superiors at the Foundation, who classified the anomalous humanoids under the highest of threat levels. The Kingdom of Abaddon is a threat. The Kingdom of Abaddon must be eliminated. Reconnaissance done prior to the disastrous mission had alerted the Foundation to the presence of anomalies in the region, but they had no idea how strong the anomalous humanoids would be. From data gathered through old reports, it seemed like the Abaddon humanoids were responsible for the deaths of no fewer than 75 Foundation personnel, and had stolen at least 12 different items from the Foundation. The leaders of the SCP Foundation tasked Research Team Omega-5 with developing a weapon that would be capable of destroying the Kingdom of Abaddon once and for all. The weapon they are researching must be capable of long-range destruction, because the moment any Foundation agent gets close to the area, they are vaporized by the reality-manipulating powers of its inhabitants. The project is given the name Twins of God, and is led by a Foundation doctor known only by the designation 051. 051 is popular in the SCP Foundation, well known for his in-depth research and charismatic personality, making him the perfect person to lead such a project. And 051 recently came across an anomaly that he believes holds the solution the Foundation has been looking for to defeat the Kingdom of Abaddon, Item 001. And so the Omega-5 team gets to work. They discover that the anomaly has incredible powers when put inside a host, which they refer to as an Item 001 entity, and set up a series of experiments using different people to harness its energy. The first series of tests all end in tragedy. The anomaly causes the entity it inhabits to become intensely radioactive. Anyone who gets close to it succumbs to immediate radiation sickness, and eventually, death. To stop the radiation problems, the Omega-5 research group intensifies the containment procedures. 051 receives reports from the higher-ups that the Kingdom of Abaddon has attacked another Foundation facility in Sudan. Long-range defense is needed ASAP. The administrator puts more pressure on Omega-5, and especially its leader 051, to solve the problems of Item 001 and develop a weapon that can save the Foundation. He stays awake for days on end, working tirelessly to create a safe and controllable Item 001 entity. Although there are signs that the weapon will work, it is still unpredictable. When Item 001 is initiated, the host entity becomes paralyzed, suffers severe cerebral hemorrhaging, and soon a new host is needed before testing can begin again. And that's not the only thing that goes wrong. Whenever the anomaly is put into a new host, sudden and random destruction of on-site structures and personnel take place. 051 knows, though, that if this power can be harnessed and controlled in the right way, that it could be the weapon that the Foundation needs to wipe out the Kingdom of Abaddon once and for all. In order to control Item 001, 051 has a mind kill switch implanted in its host's brains. 051 can activate the implant to incapacitate its host and immediately stop the unwanted destruction. Countless hosts are terminated by this mind kill switch in the early trials conducted by the Omega-5 team, but progress continues to be made, and eventually a hypothesis is formulated. Perhaps the disastrous side effects of Item 001 can be offset by spreading the anomaly across multiple subjects. They theorize that the immense mental load of the anomaly can be distributed among several hosts, thus reducing the toil it takes on each and giving them the ability to control its immense power. But 051 and the Omega-5 team need more data, and for that, they need more bodies. They consult with the director of Site-17, and it is concluded that the nearby town of San Marco would be an appropriate place to get the additional test subjects they require. On a quiet Sunday morning, Omega-5, along with support from a squad of armed SCP agents, storm into the San Marcos de la Vida Eterna church during the middle of Mass. They gather up a number of the younger congregants and bring them back to the site where Item 001 is housed. The researchers quickly ran through their new supply of test subjects, though, and Omega-5 would need to get even more if their research was to continue. Instead of going back and forth between the testing facility and San Marcos, 051 decided to move the entire Item 001 operation to the town itself. He renames the town Testing Site 001, and Omega-5 rounds up 23 of the healthiest subjects they can find for use in the next series of research tests. A few weeks after occupying the town of San Marco, Omega-5 makes its most substantial progress yet. Just as they theorized, by spreading out the anomaly of Item 001 across a specific group of hosts, they can control its powers. The test may have cost the lives of almost everyone in the town, but the ends certainly justify the means. The Kingdom of Abaddon poses an existential threat to the SCP Foundation after all, and thanks to this research, they will soon have a weapon capable of bringing them victory. The Foundation Administrator criticized 051's methods, but can't argue with his results. Unfortunately, 051 has a dark secret, a secret that disturbs even the most hardened and loyal members of Omega 5. A secret that has to do with the Item 001 hosts. The hosts that Omega 5 has made its major progress with are not the ordinary test subjects normally used by the Foundation. No, the test subjects 051 makes his breakthrough with are children. 9 of them, to be exact, all between 4 and 11 years old. Despite being told specifically by the Foundation Administrator to only test on adults, the research required 051 to break the chain of command and follow the science down the path it led. The children are contained in a reinforced bunker where only 051 and a select few have access. They are technically alive, but are functionally brain dead. The group of 9 children share a hive mind that can process information, and more importantly, can unleash the full potential of the implanted anomaly, creating and controlling a devastating power. But not everyone is thrilled with what they've achieved. Members of Omega 5 are haunted by the screams of the children that they forced to be part of their weapons development program. They describe their merging with Item 001 as being a process that rips out their souls and replaces them with something much more sinister. In fact, all of Omega 5 regret what they have been a part of and what they've done, all except 051. The 9 children can channel unprecedented amounts of energy from an unknown origin that Omega 5 hypothesizes comes from an extra-dimensional source, which is then used to unbind atoms at the quantum level. When the right activation words are spoken, it appears as though this tremendous power gives the children the ability to annihilate anything in the entire universe. It's a gun to end all guns, and only 051 has the key to control it. The 9 children work so well with an Item 001 that Omega 5 reclassifies it to include the 9 children themselves. They are not just the entity housing or controlling Item 001, they permanently become Item 001. Once Omega 5 has a better understanding of Item 001, they begin to run tests to find out the full extent of its abilities. First, they test the distance Item 001 can reach. The initial test that Omega 5 carries out is on a steel rod placed 5 kilometers away. 051 orders the children to destroy the target. Moments later, the phone next to 051 begins to ring. When he picks it up, the observer tasked with watching the pole is on the other end. He informs 051 that the steel rod has been completely vaporized. 051 is not satisfied though. He has another pole sent out, this time placed 8,000 kilometers away from the 9 children. 051 asks the children to destroy that rod. Almost immediately, the phone rings again. The target has been vaporized. 051 smiles. The next series of tests Omega 5 runs on Item 001 are to determine the maximum size of an object that can be destroyed. The tests start out with a steel sphere, 3 meters in diameter, placed 1,000 kilometers from Item 001. 051 orders the children to destroy the object. It is instantly vaporized. 051 has seen enough small tests. It's time for something big. So he does something that will later be questioned by everyone at the SCP Foundation. He orders the 9 children to destroy a Church of the Broken God worship site in Turkey. Not long after the destruction order is given to Item 001, reports begin coming in. The worship site has been obliterated with no observable damage to the surrounding area. Deadly and precise. 051 closes his eyes and takes a deep breath. He looks as if he's overcome by an immense spiritual experience. He opens his eyes, leans over to the children, and whispers the name of someone. Later that day, 051 finds out that the target he had named has been vaporized. The success of Omega 5 and Item 001 is relayed to the administration of the Foundation. They are so impressed that they make plans to use Item 001 to eliminate the Abaddon threat once and for all. However, one of the heads of the Foundation, Administrator Williams, has major concerns about the way 051 is running the program. The updates that 051 has been sending have become less scientific and more philosophical, more spiritual. Administrator Williams sends a letter to 051 reassuring him that he is doing good work. But once the mission to destroy the Kingdom of Abaddon is completed, 051 will be promoted to Director and reassigned to the newly constructed Site-19. For the good of the Foundation, and maybe the rest of the world, he'll be permanently moved away from Item 001. 051's response is short and to the point. I am fine, Administrator. The project is finished. We will complete our task when you arrive. Administrator Williams arrives at Site-001 a few days later. He is greeted by 051 and the Omega-5 team. Williams can't help but notice that 051 has a strange look in his eyes. It is the look of a crazed man who has been lost in his work and who has, perhaps, lost himself. Williams puts the thought away, though, and walks with 051 and his accompanying agents to the viewing area, where the powers of Item 001 will be demonstrated. Administrator Williams and the other agents watch from a protected viewing room as 051 enters the chamber of his new superweapon. It's time to see if their weapon that has had so much time, effort, sweat, tears, and especially blood poured into it will have been worth it. Everyone watches as 051 leans over and says the name of the Abaddon Citadel to the 9 children. All at once, they start to glow. No one observing can see what has happened in the far-off kingdom, but they know something big has happened. The administrator is thrilled, but notices something. 051 hesitated a moment while leaning over the children before standing back up. Did he whisper something else to them? And then Administrator Williams vaporizes, pulled apart at an atomic level before he has the chance to scream. What's going on? The agents standing next to where Administrator Williams previously existed begin to yell and pull out their guns. They burst through the door of the observation room and run down the hallway towards where 051 and the 9 children are located. The armed agents rush into the room, but 051 is gone. The 9 children are still. Over the next few weeks, 051 is reported to be seen several times by SCP agents. However, no one is able to catch him, and it appears as though other members of the SCP Foundation have also gone AWOL as well, perhaps joining him on the run. It is unclear what his plan is, but the reports from the reconnaissance team sent into the Sahara make it obvious what the result of his first command to the children was. There isn't a single humanoid or building left in the Kingdom of Abaddon. But even with this victory, the highest levels of the SCP Foundation have an ominous thought lurking in the back of their minds. Where did 051 go, and what is he planning to do next? Following the improper use of Item 001 leading to the untimely death of a high-ranking Foundation staff member, the weapon was deemed too dangerous and containment procedures were implemented. Due to the high amount of radiation they were found to emit, the 9 children were placed into lead-lined bags and buried under 50 meters of concrete beneath the Church of San Marcos de la Vida Eterna. Though all of the children continued to be functionally brain-dead, they still display signs of life despite their containment, and by order of the Overseer Council, have been classified as a thaumial entity.
Oh boy, here we go again. SCP-001. Over 30 different bizarre anomalies claim this #1 spot in the database, and in a sense, they're all right. Or are they? If you're feeling confused already, that's fine. We don't expect that to change. Because today we're dealing with one of the most strange and intricate 001 entries out there, Keter duty. Just pray you never get assigned to it. You see, when you work around weirdness, you sometimes get a little weird yourself. And nobody deals with more weirdness than employees of the SCP Foundation. They regularly rub elbows with everything from godlike cicadas to hyper-infectious supernatural viruses. And as the famous Tom Jones song goes, it's not unusual to suddenly take on anomalous traits after consistently working with anomalies for years. That's how the lyrics go, right? Anyway, one of the Foundation's most iconic researchers, Dr. Jack Bright, is technically just an anomalous necklace himself. But outside of some famous exceptions, the SCP Foundation is in the business of containing anomalous entities, not hiring them on and giving them a paycheck and retirement plan. That's why if you suddenly start displaying anomalous traits while on the Foundation payroll, you might receive a company memo assigning you to the dreaded Keter duty. But what is Keter duty, and what kind of anomalous traits can get you assigned to it? Let's start with the second question first. The official Keter duty guidelines list a surprisingly vast number of afflictions. These include chronic anomalous illnesses such as lycanthropy, turning into a werewolf, something called Stevenson syndrome, and the incredibly unpleasant-sounding photonic gastric discharge syndrome. You could also be placed on Keter duty because you're suffering from the manifestation of spectral phenomena, including being haunted by spirits, whether they're there to torment you or protect you. The sudden expression of anomalous traits in your DNA, which is unsettlingly vague, will also land you on Keter duty, as will the awakening of powerful magical or psionic abilities, especially ones which could be used in a potentially offensive manner. The Keter duty assignment, which involves being relocated and forced to work in a different highly secretive location that will be discussed soon, is framed as a punishment for the people involved. That way, it discourages Foundation employees from ever trying to develop anomalous powers on purpose. So what exactly is Keter duty and where does it happen? To reinforce that punishment element method, the Foundation has spread lies among their own personnel about where the job takes place, often involving being posted in some of the least desirable Foundation areas imaginable. These include Point Nemo, the area of the ocean farthest from any place of land on Earth, Pyongyang in North Korea, Stonehenge, Roswell, Lunar Area 32, and a number of Foundation waste disposal sites. However, the reality of where those on Keter duty end up is even stranger. Site 100, which in this particular instance is the true SCP-001. This Thaumiel-class anomaly is perhaps the most unique of all multi-anomaly Foundation containment sites, a bizarre labyrinth of non-Euclidean geometry that defies true explanation, but we'll do the best we can. In a sense, Site 100 is a facility with a mind of its own. It's a sprawling underground base with a layout that defies space-time, and what's more, it undergoes so-called migration events. Every so often, it will begin to exhibit a sense of dimensional instability before teleporting to a different location somewhere on Earth. Currently, the primary entrance to Site 100, known as Alpha Entrance, is located in the southwest United States, though all signs point to another migration event happening this very year. But knowing where the entrance is will only get you so far. People assigned to Keter duty are sent from the Alpha Entrance to the administration sector to be given their initial breaching, at which point the true madness begins. Let's take a look at a map of Site 100. Yikes. So there are 10 major sectors in Site 100 that you should be aware of. Entrance Alpha, Administration, Archives, Technological Containment, Biocontainment, Sapient Containment, Cognitohazardous Memetic and Semantic or CMS Containment, Esoteric Containment, Conceptual Containment, and the Core Sector. As you can tell, they have almost everything covered here, but just as insane as the anomalies that Site 100 contains and the methods they use to contain them, is how you actually get around the site. Site 100 is a spatial anomaly of truly epic proportions. While the Foundation is aware of the existence of its competent sectors, it's impossible to map out any meaningful connections between them. It would be pretty much impossible to even travel from one to another without passageways known as the routes. However, these aren't just mere portals that you can hop through like the ways in and out of the Wanderer's Library. Each route between the sectors is its own complex environment, with its own sets of protocols and rituals required to safely travel through it. Route Aleph, the bridge between the archives and the inaccessible core of Site 100, is a volcanic beach blocked off by an apparently limitless obsidian wall, where fish made from living rock swim in the nearby waters. Route Beth, connecting the core and sapient containment, is a huge and sprawling funhouse hall of mirrors. Anyone who attempts to travel through it inevitably ends up turned around and arrives back at their starting point in sapient containment. Route Daleth, the bridge that connects conceptual containment and the core, is a massive ocean that has resisted all attempts by the Foundation to traverse it. Route Vav, the bridge between esoteric containment and conceptual containment, is a massive field filled with unidentified fruit trees. Foundation expeditions have found that it too seems impossible to traverse. One expedition team was trapped inside for a whole year, until one member of the team expressed a desire to go home. At that point, they were immediately teleported back to the starting point, Route Sade, connecting administration to the CMS sector, is a huge, lush forest on top of a floating mountain. The only animals that seem to populate this forest are non-anomalous flamingos. Next, we have Route Pe, the bridge between the archive and the administration, which appears to be a hallway on the 5th floor of a tenement building in a city that the Foundation haven't been able to locate. This building is populated by non-hostile humanoid creatures, who will approach Foundation staff traversing Route Pe and invite them into their apartments, offering to partake in recreational activities with them such as video games, board games, or watching movies. The Foundation discourages its staff from accepting any of these offers while on the job. And then there's Route Shin, which connects the sapient and conceptual containment sectors. This route is unique in the sense that it acts as a power generator for the rest of Site-100, as it's filled with hundreds of large perpetual motion machines producing a constant 8.7 gigawatts of electricity. These are only some of the many routes illustrated on the Site-100 diagram. As you've probably gathered by now, it's less like a conventional building and more like a whole crazy dimension unto itself. Why does the Foundation work to maintain such a crazy place? Wouldn't it just be easier to keep it a secret and contain it like any other anomaly? Well, Site-100 wouldn't be given the SCP-001 designation if it wasn't incredibly important. If Site-100 was ever compromised, it would lead to an inevitable K-class end-of-the-world scenario, because the site is intrinsically tied to the nature and containment of literally every single Keter-class SCP in our universe, hence the nickname Keter Duty for those working at the site. In fact, an anomaly can't even be classed as a Keter if it isn't given permission by Site-100. The various sectors of Site-100 cover the entire spectrum of anomalies, and each sector is a massive panoptic structure connected by networks of glass elevators. Whenever a new Keter-class SCP is discovered, its name and a brief description of its anomalous traits will inscribe itself on one of the walls in its corresponding sector. Ever been frustrated when the O5 Council refused to sign off on an upgrade to Keter-class for a clearly dangerous SCP that poses extreme risk of containment breach? Don't blame them. It's simply that Site-100 didn't sanction the change. Anytime that Site-100 sanctions a new SCP, it also undergoes another unique process. It selects an SCP-001-K instance for the new Keter and creates a connection between them, using access points known as thresholds. Think of it as simply opening a spatially anomalous door between two SCPs. Much like a good boy, another SCP vying for the 001 slot, Site-100 has an intuitive grasp of the unseen connections between Keter-class anomalies, and each SCP-001-K instance is a complementary Keter class that will essentially cancel out the threat of its other half. Site-100 is a containment matchmaker. Its innate ability to use the anomalous to contain the anomalous is second to none. First, it took SCP-3984, an anomalous phenomenon that seemed to prevent death from happening to all life forms. In order to mitigate the effects of 3984, Site-100 opened a threshold between it and SCP-2935, also known as O-Death, an alternate universe hidden beyond a limestone cavern where all life simultaneously ceased to exist, even down to the bacterial level. By opening the threshold and allowing these two absolute opposites to mix, it seemed to undermine the effects of both and create a non-anomalous happy medium, life. But mortal life. Next, SCP-5007. This terrifying underwater anomaly manifests as a series of tentacle-like protrusions that snatch unfortunate creatures that get too close and assimilate them into its own mass. Site-100 cleverly opened a threshold to SCP-169, a massive underwater arthropod known as the Leviathan. SCP-169 was tangled up by the tentacles, but it's too big to be fully consumed or assimilated, and the result is that 5007 is trapped in a perpetually incapacitated state, akin to choking, keeping it contained and stopping it from going after anyone else. Let's take a look at two even more hostile and dangerous Keter-class anomalies matched up by Site-100. First, we've got SCP-5501. An old camera from the 1800s that comes with 18 photographs. These photographs act as a kind of portal to an incredibly frightening alternate reality that creatures regularly crawl out of, attacking and killing anyone within reach. Site-100 found a perfect match for this nasty customer, SCP-1983. This is a small house that acts as a portal to a race of tall monsters with needle-like appendages that leave the house in search of victims. When they catch these victims, they take out their hearts and bring them back to the nest. Site-100 opened a threshold into the SCP-1983 house and placed the 5501 photographs inside. As a result, the hostile creatures from both dimensions now regulate each other's populations by killing each other. Another job well done for Site-100. Another Keter class dealt with by SCP-100 is SCP-001. This is a deadly plot of land in Poland which decays and corrodes all matter, organic or inorganic, placed within its confines. This would be bad enough, but as you'll often find with anomalous plots of deadly land, its area of influence is growing. Even knowing about it can cause it to become more powerful. But Site-100 found its perfect Keter class counterpart, SCP-1262. This is a massive mass of plant matter that grows at a truly astonishing rate, expanding by around 7 kilometers an hour. Much like absolute death and absolute life, by putting 1262 into SCP-PL-122, a healthy medium was found somewhere in between. And finally, perhaps the strangest and most creative match Site-100 has ever pulled off, SCP-3852 and SCP-2547. 3852 is an anonymous corpse that manifests in small towns, sowing fear and suspicion. Eventually, a local person is believed to be responsible for this murder, and is lynched in a rage by the townspeople as a form of vigilante justice. The corpse then moves on to the next town. 2547, if you can believe it, is even weirder. It's a pack of dogs led by an intelligent talking coyote dressed as a priest. Site-100 had the truly galaxy brain idea to open a threshold and connect the two. As a result, whenever the corpse manifests in the town, the dogs rampage in and take over. At that point, they set up a kind of ridiculous kangaroo court, where a jury made up of people from the town are forced to find 3852's scapegoat innocent. If they don't, the dogs will simply hold the town's water supply hostage until 3852's anomalous effects pass. Such an obvious idea. Now, why didn't the Foundation think of that? Keter duty may not be the most conventional, easy, or attractive work, but like everything the Foundation does, making sure Site-100 can keep doing its job is a necessary part of keeping our world safe from anomalous threats. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to get going. Do you know which is the right route out of here? It was 1948 in Villa Blanca, Guatemala. As night fell, two young boys, Carlos and Miguel, played a game of soccer in the street. It was a quiet town full of humble, hard-working people, and they were about to come face to face with a monster. Typically, when something like this happened, you'd know exactly who to call: the SCP Foundation. Problem is, while these days we can generally depend on the hard-working agents and researchers of the Foundation to save us from any anomalous, supernatural threats with their tactics, expertise, and equipment, it wasn't always this way. There was a time before the SCP Foundation became the titan of anomaly combating prowess it is today, and it's that time that we're focusing on today. It all comes back to a strange and violent creature wandering the darkened streets of Guatemala, or as Dr. Charles Ogden Gears proposed we call it, SCP-001, the prototype. SCP-001 is a topic that we've covered in a number of videos, but even then we can never quite capture the full scope of this wily designation. What is SCP-001 is probably one of the most loaded questions you can possibly ask a member of the SCP Foundation, and it may be your last, as the majority of the files under the SCP-001 umbrella are highly classified for pretty much everyone under Level 5 clearance. 001 covers a large number of potentially anomalous items, entities, and concepts, from the dreaded Scarlet King to the awe-inspiring Gate Guardian, to the very SCP Foundation itself, through the eyes of the charmingly incompetent Unusual Incidents Unit of the FBI. Perhaps they're all real, perhaps only one of them is, and the rest are in there as a smokescreen. Perhaps they're all fake, red herrings laid down to hide the trail to something even more secretive and fantastic. All we know is that 001 seemed to be gathered around a collection of loose themes: the beginnings of the Foundation, events or entities that could end the Foundation or even the world, and key formative moments in the Foundation's history. Dr. Gear's proposal for SCP-001 lies firmly in the latter camp, and if you keep watching and listening closely, you'll see exactly why. Back to Carlos and Miguel, the pair of 11-year-olds playing football on the quiet back streets of Villa Blanca. They were kicking the ball back and forth when they heard a strange screeching noise in the distance. At first they thought it was some kind of injured bird, squawking desperately for help. Being good kids, they didn't waste a second running into the action, heading further into the outskirts of town. However, the creature they encountered on that rural road was certainly no bird. When they first saw it hunched over a few meters in front of them, they thought it must have been a horribly injured man. He was deadly thin, with gray-brown skin that looked either bruised or burned. It was twitching and weeping, its chest heaving in heavy labored pants. Its limbs were jerking wildly, as though the creature was being electrocuted. "Hey mister, are you okay?" Carlos called out in Spanish. In that moment, what they had wrongly thought was a man just froze up, finally registering their presence. Immediately, the two boys knew something was wrong, as the creature slowly rose to its full height, well over 6 feet, towering over the two of them, even at a distance. They noticed something was wrong with its limbs. They were too long, well out of proportion with its human-sized torso. It didn't have hands and feet, at least not in the way that humans do. Instead, its slender ankles terminated in long black spikes, and its wrists each split off into 3 equally black claws. But worst of all was its face, if you could even call what that monster had a face. Its head was split in the middle by a huge mouth. At first, its gnarly lips were pursed, but they soon slid open with a low, rumbling roar. The boys could feel their knees shaking as they saw the monster's mouth full of long, rotten fangs. Something started sliding up the dark passage of the monster's throat. A translucent, milky blue sphere. Was that thing an eye? It made the two boys feel sick to even look at it. That's when the eye started to glow, and the space around the monster began to shimmer slightly, like some kind of terrible sorcery. As the two boys felt a strange force pulling at them, trying to tug them into the creature's embrace, they were suddenly jogged from their frightened paralysis and decided to finally make a run for it. There was no doubt about what had just happened. They'd encountered a demon in the flesh, intent on taking their souls straight to hell. When the two of them told their parents, they were met at first with disbelief. Two young boys saw something that frightened them in the dark, perhaps an animal, if anything at all, and they'd let their imaginations run wild. It was typical of children. However, things didn't seem quite so simple when more sightings started popping up. People all across the town of Villa Blanca started seeing this monster, all with matching descriptions. A huge, emaciated beast with a mouth for a face, its glowing blue eye nested inside. The natural excuses circulated at first. Perhaps the creature was a local prankster in a costume. This would be comforting to believe, but how many pranksters in costumes can completely disappear before your very eyes? The monster's eye would glow, and just like that, it would simply vanish. As fear and paranoia began spreading through the town, people suggested that perhaps it was a case of mass hysteria, fear and panic taking over rationality. But by this point, things had gotten worse. Carlos and Miguel, the two boys who'd first discovered the demon on the back road, had become sick. They were experiencing severe nausea, vomiting, headaches, and diarrhea. Their bodies weakened. Lesions began developing on their skin. As their conditions deteriorated, and it seemed as though nobody was capable of treating them, a rumor spread that the monster was somehow inducing this sickness. The town doctor didn't have the expertise to diagnose it, but the boys were suffering from acute radiation sickness. And they wouldn't be the only ones. Many of the people who'd reported sightings and close encounters with the monster started coming down with severe radiation sickness. To the townspeople, it just seemed to be a demon spreading some invisible plague among them. But the horrors wouldn't stop there. It seemed that this demon also liked to take a more direct approach to harming the townsfolk, because not long after the sickness broke out, people started disappearing. There were never any bodies. The most that would ever be found were tattered items of clothing left at the site of the disappearances, or blood smeared across the walls or ground. Before they knew it, 7 of their people were gone. It seemed that for all intents and purposes, God had abandoned them. They were playthings of the demon now. Thankfully for the townsfolk who weren't yet irradiated or vanished, an organization was forming, one that might be their only chance at salvation. Someday in the future, it would become known as the SCP Foundation, but it had a lot to learn before it got there. You see, the reason that this iteration of SCP-001 is known as the prototype is that, if Dr. Gears is to be believed, it may be the first anomalous entity that they ever truly faced. So naturally, getting the creature captured and contained didn't go quite as smoothly as most of their modern jobs, despite the comparative simplicity of this old threat. General Machoy, an ex-military operator that became part of what we'll once again call the precursors to the Foundation, led a research and recovery team into Villa Blanca to hunt down and retrieve the beast that had been causing all this misery and death among the townsfolk. However, this proved to be easier said than done. While its bestial appearance might fool people into thinking the monster was just a mindless animal, later writings on the creature would describe it as both incredibly cunning and terrifyingly fast. When a group of armed personnel first tried to engage the creature directly, they had no idea that they were walking right into the middle of a bloodbath. They believed they had it surrounded on another rural back road, advancing with assault rifles, when the creature flipped out and started killing them. The prototype proved to have frightening offensive capabilities. Its 3 dark claws easily carved through the armor of the soldiers trying desperately to contain it. The creature moved so fast that none of them could reliably draw a bead on it, and if any of them could, it was holding their severed head before they had a chance to squeeze the trigger. But death by the creature's claws was one of the more pleasant ways it could kill its victims. At one point during an engagement with precursor troops, it opened its mouth and unveiled its glowing blue eye. At this point, one of the soldiers screamed and suddenly seemed to be sucked inside of himself, completely disappearing. The prototype's blue eye glowed again, and it once again just teleported away from the scene. A number of soldiers who survived this altercation later needed to be treated for acute radiation sickness. Researchers eventually managed to figure out what was actually happening with the creature. It had the ability to manifest micro-singularities, tiny black holes that it used to both teleport from place to place and defend itself from attacks when necessary. These singularities wouldn't stick around for long, a few seconds at most, but they had the terrifying side effect of putting out massive amounts of radiation. This is why it was making so much of the town and the recovery team sick via mere proximity. Thankfully, in finding out the creature's strength, they also managed to find out its weaknesses. Its powers were dampened by high humidity, bright lights, and especially intense strobing lights. It was through the use of these lights that the creature was finally captured and brought into ADRX-19, a complex that would later become Site-19 for containment. There, its containment procedures were devised by one of the burgeoning organization's top minds, Dr. Herman Keter. However, Dr. Keter would sadly never actually live to see the duration of the prototype's containment at ADRX-19. He was tragically killed by the monster, though his name would live on as the designation for anomalies that were particularly difficult to contain. It was thanks to him that his co-workers realized lead-lined walls, a reinforced steel door, a 100% humidity environment, and the frequent application of high-intensity strobe lights were the best way to keep the prototype locked up for good. To this day, this iteration of SCP-001 is a fascinating reminder that the SCP Foundation wasn't always the juggernaut it is today. There was once a time where they had as little idea of what they were doing as the rest of us. There's no better representation of this than the file itself. It was an era before object classes and conventional designation numbers. The file is written in a sketchy, disorganized manner and arranged into item designation number, warning, description of item, detail of current containment, report, and addendum. As with any experience in life, it's always worth asking, what can we learn from the SCP Foundation's experience with its possible first anomaly, a monster that seems almost nostalgically quaint by today's standards? Perhaps the greatest message is that everything is a work in progress. It was only by determination and persistence that the Foundation could go from an organization challenged by a monster like the Prototype to going toe-to-toe with real heavy hitters like the Scarlet King. How very inspirational. If you're familiar with the SCP Foundation, then you already know the exact reason why there are multiple SCP-001s. You may even think you know which of them is the real SCP-001. But for those of you who are new here, or who just need a little reminder, the designation of SCP-001 doesn't refer to a single creature, object, or entity, but rather a collection of various anomalies that are apparently kept in containment by the SCP Foundation. At present, it is unclear why there are multiple files collected under the shared designation of SCP-001. Some believe it is because these anomalies are some of the earliest ever contained by the Foundation. This would mean that they share the designation of SCP-001, as they were likely encountered before the SCP Foundation introduced their current numbering system. However, there also exists a theory that this is nothing more than intentional misdirection. Perhaps the multiple SCP-001 files are an attempt by the Foundation to conceal information about the true SCP-001. After all, it wouldn't be the first time this hyper-secretive organization deceived us. Anomalies sharing the name SCP-001 include the infamous Scarlet King, the massive Gate Guardian, and the world-ending event known as When Day Breaks. But today we'll be using SCP-001 to refer not to an entity or an event, but to a location codenamed God's Blind Spot. Located in an unassuming corner of the world is a site that the SCP Foundation constructed and designated as Facility T. According to their archive, it's a largely unremarkable place, situated at a spot on the Sinai Peninsula, which is a part of Egypt that forms a bridge between the continents of Africa and Asia. In the 18th century, archaeologists excavating the area uncovered the remains of a stone structure believed to be an inn that dates back to the 2nd millennium BC. However, since the construction of Facility T, any trace of this structure has since disappeared. So, what makes this unremarkable site so important to the SCP Foundation? Why establish a facility if there was nothing anomalous about its nature? What distinguishes this SCP-001 site in the eyes of the Foundation is the area's profound lack of any ambient Akiva radiation. But what is Akiva radiation? Well, according to the Foundation's researchers, it's a form of cosmic background radiation, one that's not overtly harmful to human beings. If you grew up in a strict church-going household, then it's highly likely you would have been exposed to a lot of this non-electromagnetic radiation and never even realized it. You see, the thing with Akiva radiation is that it is directly correlated with the amount of religious faith a person has. Regardless of which religion someone follows, Akiva radiation will form around them. It tends to be harmless to humans. However, certain anomalous entities and SCPs considered to be demonic in nature can be repelled and even fought off with high levels of Akiva radiation. The presence of other powerful anomalies, those considered more benign or even holy, can also create an increase in this radiation. SCP-001 has earned the nickname God's Blind Spot for a number of reasons, one being that it is the only place on Earth with a natural absence of this Akiva radiation. The Foundation has conducted experiments that involved bringing sources known to emit Akiva radiation into the area of SCP-001, but when they measured, no change in radiation levels was detected, meaning that the space around Facility T does not actively block Akiva radiation from entering it, but also cannot absorb or retain this religious radiation. It might be more accurate to say that the location destroys any trace of residual Akiva without damaging the source. A lack of faith-field radiation is far from the only anomalous property of SCP-001 though. During a number of tests involving D-Class personnel, the Foundation witnessed that, while in the area, it also becomes impossible for the death of any human being to occur, a discovery that obviously needed to be researched further. The first test involved a healthy human male who was left in a containment cell on the SCP-001 site and observed. He had no supplies, no food, no water, yet over 120 days this man stayed alive, never succumbing to starvation or dehydration. Next, a female member of D-Class was exposed to a lethal dose of cyanide gas within Facility T, and suffered none of the expected effects. Foundation researchers then repeated this cyanide gas test using 30 common brown rats, all of which were killed. proving that it was only humans that couldn't be killed while within SCP-001. God's blind spot seems to also be able to slow or halt the effects of terminal illnesses, as proven when a D-Class with stage 4 cancer was brought into SCP-001. Despite her prognosis stating that she would be dead imminently, the woman survived in the area for almost 800 days. Her cancer symptoms never advanced, and she only died after finally leaving the area of SCP-001. There are limitations to this anomalous effect though. One test involved cremating a healthy male D-Class while he was still alive. The man's body caught fire just as you would expect it to, and he was burned to death. According to the findings of that test and similar variations, Foundation researchers have learned that the life-preserving qualities of SCP-001 don't prevent death by extreme external damage. One of the final tests to take place within SCP-001 involved a pair of 24-year-old identical D-Class twins. One of the twins, designated Twin A, was held at Facility T, while the other, Twin B, was imprisoned in a cell at a different Foundation site. After observing them for over 26 years, Twin B aged naturally to the age of 50. His twin, however, did not appear to age at all over the course of 2.5 decades. It was only when moved to another facility that Twin A began to show signs of aging. The aging process for Twin A was rapid too, and eventually he caught up with his brother. Being a benign, non-threatening anomaly, the Foundation has been more than happy to use God's blind spot to their own advantage. Facility T was specifically established on this site to house the headquarters of the O5 Council, the overseers of the entire SCP Foundation. It's hardly surprising that the Overseer Council would want to set up shop here. After all, it's the one spot on planet Earth where no human being can ever die of natural causes, and will not age for the duration of their stay. Of course, this locked the O5 Council to one location. But what if they could replicate the effects of SCP-001 elsewhere? Of course, this is what the SCP Foundation attempted. Following their research into God's blind spot, the Foundation's own Dr. Marvin Scranton attempted to artificially recreate the area's anomalous effects somewhere else. His hope was, by generating a vacuum of Akiva radiation, that a second instance of SCP-001 would occur at a location of his choosing. Or, as his assistant Bertrand put it, they planned to build a box and then push God out of it. As it turned out, God had other plans. Dr. Scranton quickly realized the hubris of his scheme. The Akiva radiation in the selected area rapidly dropped to 0, just as planned. But then something unexpected happened. Scranton detected an increase in Humes. These are essentially parts of the fabric of reality, and are what's often disrupted by reality-bending SCPs. Something had come into our world thanks to the O5 Council's attempt to recreate SCP-001. Something impossible for the Foundation to measure or observe. In other words, Scranton had no idea what he unleashed, or where it went. Following this incident, the O5 Council realized a worrying increase in the anomalous incidents they were encountering. Whether or not this came as a direct result of their meddling with the fabric of the universe was unclear, but it forced the Council to reconsider the focus and direction of the entire SCP Foundation. Up until this point, they had been an organization focused purely on research, but now they had to embrace a new approach to how they handled anomalies. From then on, the Foundation's objective became to actively seek out and contain anomalous entities, creatures, objects, and locations like SCP-001. Rather than just observing these phenomena for study, they would secure, contain, and protect. The final portion of SCP-001's file is a memorandum detailing an arrangement between the O5 Council and an unknown counterparty. In the document, someone named Sheldon Katz set out revised terms for the Foundation's continued use of Facility T. Sheldon states that he has reached an understanding with the counterparty, and that the contents of the document are to serve as a formal agreement, a contract of sorts between the SCP Foundation and someone else. According to this contract, the incident with Scranton put a strain on the relationship between the Foundation and whoever the counterparty is. and that the O5 Council are seeking to make amends in order to continue their new goal of collecting and containing anomalies. So who was this counterparty that the Overseer Council was so desperate to appease and have on their side? Who could possibly be a higher power than the most powerful secret organization on Earth? Well, an actual higher power, of course. That's right. The O5 Council was making a deal with God over how they were allowed to use his blind spot, or at least a very powerful being that considers itself to be God. The rules laid out on their agreement stated that no person was permitted to stay at the site of SCP-001 for more than 120 years, including members of the O5 Council, along with other members of Foundation staff, management, researchers, security personnel, and test subjects. Additionally, the SCP Foundation's Ethics Committee was required to annually report any and all of the O5 Council's decisions to God. For his own part, God was restricted from smiting or exacting his terrible wrath upon any member of Foundation personnel. That's right. A perk of working for the SCP Foundation is getting around-the-clock divine protection, at least from God himself. That's still a lot better than an employee dental plan. This came with a condition, however, that anyone committing a transgression or mortal sin was given a 90-day written notice and an opportunity to repent their wrongdoing. In return, God demanded that members of the Foundation only worshipped him and no other divine entities. I, the Lord, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, was written in the contract. Finally, the agreement between the O5 Council and God was that they would work together. The Foundation and the counterparty would be equal partners when it came to the containment of SCPs and anomalies. Of all the strange and unexplained phenomena that the SCP Foundation encounters on a regular basis, it hardly comes as much of a surprise that they've got a direct line to the big guy upstairs, or at least one who purports to be. Still, the fact that the O5 Council have a business arrangement with an ultra-powerful deity-like being and express written permission to use his blind spot where no person can die or age is hardly a comforting thought. At least the SCP Foundation only ever uses its power for good, right? Supernatural monsters are on the loose. Practitioners of the arcane arts are here to bring about the end of the world. Sinister paramilitary forces are using paranormal objects to gain an edge over their enemies. In short, things are messed up. And when the anomalous is out of line, we all know that there's only one group you'd ever think to call: the FBI's Unusual Incidents Unit. What? Were you expecting someone else? Sure, they don't have the resources of the SCP Foundation. They don't have the strategy of the Global Occult Coalition. They don't have the ruthlessness of the Chaos Insurgency, or the arcane knowledge advantages of the Serpent's Hand. But they've got to have something, right? Right? Okay, maybe you're not convinced, but you will be. You may not respect them yet, but you'll change your tune when you find out that the Unusual Incidents Unit has dealt with one of the most important anomalies out there, SCP-001. Or as the true experts over at the UIU call it, CA3, short for Confirmed Anomaly 3. If the evidence and files put together by the UIU are to be believed, and who are we kidding, of course they are, then they may have the answer to one of the anomalous world's biggest questions. How was the SCP Foundation actually formed? But before we jump into the mysteries of CA3, let's talk a little bit more about the real heroes of today's story, the UIU. This secretive offshoot of the FBI, America's premier domestic intelligence agency, was personally commissioned by J. Edgar Hoover during the Cold War. Why? For the same reason that literally everything happened in the US during the Cold War, to get an edge over the Soviets. Hoover was an extraordinarily powerful man in US politics, his tenure as FBI director spanning the terms of 8 different presidents. If he wanted to start a unit of agents whose sole job was investigating the supernatural, nobody would dare stand in his way. Everyone always talks about the nuclear arms race going on back in the 1960s, but far fewer people talk about the supernatural arms race that was happening at the exact same time. World War II coincided neatly with the 7th Occult War, an important geopolitical event that played a huge role in shaping the global occult coalition, and a number of high-ranking members of the Nazi Party were believed to be key figures in this secret magical war. When the Soviets sacked a number of German cities as part of their offensive campaigns in World War II, they were able to bring back scores of anomalous items that the Nazis had been using to consolidate dark power. This didn't bode well for the United States government during the Cold War. After all, the only thing scarier to them than communists were magical communists. The US needed to build up its own anomalous arsenal, and that's where the UIU came in. The FBI allocated some of its okayest personnel to the task. Most were either agents who had experienced a paranormal encounter out in the field, or who were being punished for some kind of heinous mistake they'd made carrying out their duties elsewhere. Despite not being the best of the best, these agents sure were eager to get their hands on some cans. That isn't an innuendo, by the way. The Foundation refers to anomalies it deals with as SCPs, or SCIPs. The GOC calls them parathreats, and the UIU calls them CANs, again short for Confirmed Anomalies. Well, when it's an anomalous event or location, anyway. Anomalous objects like cursed books or supernaturally powerful weapons are referred to as CARTs, or Confirmed Artifacts. And finally, anomalous people or sentient entities are referred to by the unfortunate name of Can Man. It may not sound as cool, but hey, it gets the job done just fine in the end. While the Unusual Incidents Unit may lack the knowledge, strength, resources, and even cred of its fellow groups of interest, that doesn't mean that it doesn't keep track of the others. In fact, the UIU has a pretty unique relationship with each of them. The GOC, for example, is nicknamed the Suits by the UIU. The official UIU orientation states that the Suits outrank them, and if they're asked to follow an order by a member of the Suits, they should just go ahead and do it. Same goes for members of the Fireworks, which is the UIU lingo for the Chaos Insurgency. Unlike the Foundation, which generally has the resources to go toe-to-toe with the Chaos Insurgency, the UIU are rightfully terrified of them. Official orders from the top are for UIU agents to do whatever they say, or they might find themselves getting shot in the head by a Chaos Insurgent, or worse. Next, the Cart Shoppers, also known as Marshall, Carter, and Dark, a sinister gentleman's club and auctioneer of anomalous items. Official protocol is to raid any deals being conducted by Marshall, Carter, and Dark, but oftentimes these raids are unsuccessful, because MC&D's security force are more competent fighters than anyone on the Unusual Incidents Unit payroll. On the other hand of the spectrum are the Can Collection, the official UIU nickname for the Serpent's Hand. UIU leadership recommends against their agents staging any one-on-one confrontations with them. Official memos also contain the phrase, "If they give you an order, consider following it. They can probably set you on fire with their mind." And finally, the most important relationship of all is the one they have with the SCP Foundation. Much like the rest of the groups of interest on their roster, the UIU is subordinate to the SCP Foundation, their agents happily taking orders from them at the drop of a hat. They call the Foundation the Skippers, but don't let that casual name fool you. The SCP Foundation is so far above them on the pecking order that they rarely even communicate in any official capacity. When the Foundation talks to the UIU, it's always through code. They wouldn't dream of letting a hapless UIU agent helping them on any major operation, but lazier agents of the Foundation might occasionally outsource work to UIU agents. If ever one of these plucky feds receives a message starting with, "Hey Skipper," they can be sure they're about to have a low-priority anomalous case pawned off on them. The UIU are so subservient to the SCP Foundation that it has sometimes resulted in truly humiliating mix-ups. One high-ranking member of the UIU once took orders from a pizza delivery guy because he thought the pizzeria's name, the Spiced Crust Pizzeria, which could be shortened to SCP, was actually a coded plant sent by the Foundation to deliver a message, rather than a deep dish pepperoni and cheese. Incidents like this are why nobody takes the UIU seriously. But according to them, there was a time before all of this. That time ended on September 7th, 1954, when CA3, or SCP-001 as the Foundation would later call it, first appeared on the UIU's radar. It seemed to be the most standard can you could possibly imagine, an anomalous high school building causing a disturbance in the suburbs of small-town America. The UIU received the call after a number of students claimed the interior of their schools suddenly looked completely different than it ever had before, despite there being no records of an official remodel. And we're not just talking about moving furniture and a new coat of paint either. The official CA3 file logs a number of changes. These include, but are not limited to, all the walls in the building becoming steel-reinforced concrete, all the windows being blacked out from the inside, all student desks, personal effects, textbooks, and any other standard equipment left inside the school simply disappearing in the night. The entire floor plan of the building seemed to have shifted, with rooms altering in both dimensions and location, as well as featuring seemingly random modifications within. None of this matched up with the building's original blueprints, which were obtained by the UIU shortly after the can was reported. But things got even stranger for investigating UIU agents. The building now contained 17 computers, each with state-of-the-art magnetic core RAM and advanced cybersecurity. For a suburban high school in 1954, it goes without saying that this was extremely impressive. But weirdest of all was the fact that a large and seemingly impenetrable steel wall had appeared in the auditorium, blocking it off and leaving whatever was taking place on the other side a complete mystery. Naturally, the UIU did what little they could to investigate the matter. The first investigation group they sent inside, Team CA305, never came back out, and Team CA306, the team they sent in to locate and retrieve the first team, also disappeared within the anomaly. Classic UIU expertise at work. Almost a month after discovery and initial containment, a strange noise began emanating from the auditorium. Shortly after that, the building became filled with people, all walking around and working at different operations. Eerily, everyone there had a resemblance to members of Team CA306, the rescue team sent in to save the 12 members of CA305, all of whom were still unaccounted for. 3 months later, the strangeness escalated. More noises came from the auditorium, and the anomalous people inside the building had gathered around the steel wall within. There was a hole in the wall 6 feet in diameter, and every 3 minutes for several hours, the people in the room would appear to simply pull an anomalous object out of it. The items were then carried away and placed in one of the many rooms that used to be classrooms before being locked up. The people within the building then seemed to start guarding these strange items. Others started performing tests with what seemed like far more advanced technology and methods than what was possessed by the UIU during the 1950s. What was going on here? A few days later, several armed guards exited the building and began guarding the perimeter. When UIU personnel attempted to lead an assault on these guards, they were quickly overpowered, even when advancing with vastly superior numbers. Whether this was due to the skill of the guards or the incompetence of UIU agents is still very much an open question. Though strangely enough, intel bleeding out from the inside confirmed that the people within were treating their anomalous items with UIU containment and testing protocols, which is consistent with the knowledge that CA305 would have had. It seemed almost as though 05, or copies of 05, were creating a new splinter organization from within. And soon enough, it wasn't just confined to the interior of the CA3 building anymore. CA6, a can man that the UIU had been tracking outside the school, was suddenly kidnapped and shoved into a black car by 2 assailants, who appeared identical to Agent Dixon, a man who had been a member of Team CA306. The black car then returned to the CA3 facility and was allowed to enter into the complex by the armed guards. CA6 was then removed from the car by the Dixon clones and placed into containment in one of the classrooms. It wasn't long after that the anomalous people within the CA3 facility made direct contact with the UIU outside. They sent a message in Morse code on May 1st, 1965. The people sending this message identified themselves as the 05 Council, a name that seemed to be taken directly from the 05 recon team sent into the facility months ago. They identified the new organization that they just constructed within the confines of the CA3 facility, the SCP Foundation. They just opened their very first containment site. This new foundation expressed the desire to become allies with the Unusual Incidents Unit, but sadly for them, it was essentially the last time they'd ever really be relevant. If this Foundation origin story is to be believed, and as with all entries under the title SCP-001, it's worth taking it with a healthy dose of skepticism. Then the UIU witnessed the birth of the organization that would quickly go on to outperform and overshadow them. A big win for humanity in the quest to secure, contain, and protect ourselves from dangerous anomalies, but another L for the UIU. MTF agents scramble through the crowd of bloodthirsty, hypnotized festival goers. Up on the stage, a pair of living statues hold down a screaming man as they produce medieval instruments of torture from an antique case. Maybe this time the agents can stop it. Maybe they can prevent all the horror and bloodshed. But one thing stands in their way. A man-sized, cartoonish dove costume flying down towards them, wielding a large wooden mallet that would only bring death and destruction. Needless to say, even by Foundation standards, this one is going to be weird. When you found yourself sought out by the SCP Foundation's recruitment division and offered a role in the research department, they made sure to inform you of the risks. After all, a workplace injury in this line of work might be far more serious than slipping on a wet floor or developing carpal tunnel from typing all day. Working within the ranks of the Foundation, you could be the unfortunate victim of any number of dangerous anomalies, whether it's SCP-096 appearing behind you after you accidentally caught a glimpse of it as a single pixel in a photo, or if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time whenever SCP-682 next broke out, then chances are you'd be receiving an early redundancy and a closed casket service, if there's even enough of you left to bury. It is the one thing you never want to happen. The scenario you're constantly warned about from the moment you join the Foundation, a containment breach. Anything can be the cause of an anomaly breaking free of containment and spreading untold chaos in the process. Whether it's the result of a particularly cantankerous SCP that doesn't take kindly to being locked up, an act of earnest human error with disastrous consequences, or even international sabotage enacted by a group of interests trying to seize anomalies for their own purposes. There is no telling when or where a containment breach might occur, or is there? Despite all the resources at their disposal, specialized facilities spanning the globe, advanced technology, and a nearly inexhaustible supply of personnel to contain SCPs, the Foundation still manages to suffer catastrophic casualties as a result of containment breaches. But surely, if they're so well equipped, such breaches should be almost impossible, right? Well, yes. So what causes them? What if every containment breach, all the loss of life, the further spread of anomalies, and the destruction of Foundation property incurred was all caused by an SCP? Not a living entity, mind you, more some kind of latent anomalous phenomenon that triggers containment breaches without warning. The prevailing theory surrounding this phenomenon is even itself considered to be an SCP within its own right, referred to as SCP-001. Of course, as many of those well-versed in the history and practices of the SCP Foundation will already know, SCP-001 is a designation shared by a number of anomalies. Some are believed to actually exist, while others are speculated to just be falsified covers created to mask the real SCP-001. From beings such as the Gate Guardian and the Scarlet King, to the existence of God's blind spot and even the Foundation itself, each of these SCP-001s are nicknamed after the Foundation researcher who proposed them for the designation, and often considered to be some of the first, if not the very first anomalies ever encountered, or at least documented. In that regard, this SCP-001, Plague's proposal, could well be one of the very first latent anomalies to exist, explaining why so many SCPs were uncontained prior to the Foundation being established, and why even now, with all their resources, containment breaches are still a worryingly frequent occurrence. There are multiple anomalies that appear to have been directly affected by SCP-001, at least according to the research of one of the Foundation's directors, Director Legg. While he might be drawing conclusions and seeing patterns where there aren't any to speak of, Legg reasons that the circumstances of these specific recorded containment breaches seem to indicate that SCP-001 was at fault. The first of these incidences Director Legg focuses on in his research is also the one we'll be focusing on for the remainder of this video. It is designated as SCP-001-1. SCP-001-1 previously went under the designation of SCP-5770 and is an annual anomalous event that occurs in the Piazza della Signora in Florence, Italy. The event consists of an unscheduled festival that goes on for a period of 10 days, wherein anyone present within a 10-kilometer range of the affected area suffers a mind-altering effect that compels them to attend the festival.
However, SCP-001-1 is not a well-documented, long-running festival of great cultural significance to the people of Florence. Neither is it an event that is widely advertised. Yet those who have experienced the psychic draw of this anomalous festival are driven to attendance. During the course of SCP-001-1, two anomalous entities that resemble the statues created by Michelangelo during the Renaissance will host a show where they take to the stage to judge people they deem to be sinners. This pair of statue creatures will call upon the audience and bring those they've designated sinners up onto the stage with them, and will then enact makeshift, grueling punishments. These have been noted to resemble the acts depicted in Dante Alighieri's Inferno. So if you ever need any further proof of how hellish these punishments are, we recommend asking an art expert. The moment that SCP-001-1 ceases and the festival comes to a close, any and all in attendance are subject to yet another form of anomalous mental alteration, and will proceed to instantly forget the event. Any of the horrific tortures performed on stage becomes unknown to those that directly witnessed it, leaving them unaware of anything that occurred only moments prior. So given the Foundation's extensive knowledge of this festival, its gruesome proceedings, and the effects it has on those in attendance, you might be forgiven for expecting them to have a fairly well-established method of keeping the event contained, presumably setting up a cordon to keep attendants out of the area, administering amnestics to any that might have been affected by SCP-001-1's anomalous mind-altering. But then, you remember SCP-001, the theory behind what could be the cause of containment breaches. As a result, the Foundation has still been unable to establish containment of the event formerly known as SCP-5770, and Director Legg's research has tied this issue with containment to SCP-001. Hence, the festival's redesignation to SCP-001-1. Following the initial discovery of an anomalous annual occurrence in the city of Florence in 1985, the SCP Foundation's head researcher, assigned to what was then known as SCP-5770, was one Joseph Pasqua, former site director at Site-322. Pasqua was, according to the incidents recorded on the Foundation's own database, somehow manipulated by one of the anomalous statue creatures that performed the show during occurrences of SCP-5770. It was thanks to the influence of this entity that Joseph Pasqua deserted his post at the Foundation and went into hiding. The fact that the influence of one of the performers of this festival was able to extend its influence to a senior member of the Foundation was not only troubling, but also constituted a containment breach. Pasqua would later be tracked down by Foundation agents operating in and around Italy. He was discovered 30 years later after his desertion in Vatican City as a member of the Papal Conclave, a specially selected group of Catholic cardinals that are charged with electing a new pope. If the former site director was still being influenced by the statue creatures, it is highly likely that he spent the previous 3 decades climbing the ranks of the Catholic Church, potentially to install a new pope at the behest of the entities responsible for conducting the torture of the Florence Festival. Another recorded incident of a containment breach surrounding the event that seemed to lend credence to the existence of SCP-001, the anomalous cause of breaches, occurred the year following SCP-5770's discovery. In 1986, the Foundation was observing the proceedings of the festival as part of their ongoing investigation into its bizarre nature. On site were agents of Mobile Task Force Zeta-66, better known under their unit's codename of the Guardian Angels. During the festival, MTF Zeta-66 operatives noticed the presence of a previously unknown entity associated with the anomalous event. The Foundation was already aware of the pair of seemingly living Michelangelo sculptures, designating them as SCP-5770-1 and SCP-5770-2 respectively. This third entity, despite being given the designation of SCP-5770-3, had its own preferred identification for itself. The being referred to itself as God's Strongest Soldier and resembled a mascot costume of a dove. Approximately 2 meters tall, this creature's body was entirely hollow. There was nothing within the costume. The costume was its body. The responding agent of MTF Zeta-66, codenamed Zeta Turquoise, was the first to confront God's Strongest Soldier and was greeted with quite the opener.
Tweedly-dee, tweedly-da, God's Strongest Soldier is my name, getting rid of sin is my game.
Confused at the creature's demeanor and presence, Zeta Turquoise called in a report to command, stating that a large birdman was harassing random attendants of the festival. When Turquoise moved in to confront SCP-5770-3, the creature repeated its assertion that it was God's strongest soldier and that its aim was to get people into heaven. The agent requested that God's strongest soldier get out of his way. He had a job to do, but the bizarre Birdman responded with more whimsical nonsense.
Burger, sandwich, fruit, and fries, you just told a big fat lie!
God's strongest soldier proclaimed.
Twiddly-deep-doop-da, diddly-deep-dop-da, pa-pa-da-pa-da-da.
Upon Zeta Turquoise's attempt to push past the creature, SCP-5770-3 produced an oversized wooden mallet, seemingly from out of thin air. It then wound its arms back and immediately, viciously, struck the MTF agent. A low-orbit Foundation satellite reported not long after that an object had been detected exiting the Earth's stratosphere. Analysis confirmed that it was, indeed, Zeta Turquoise. Yes, he was literally yeeted into Earth's orbit by a cartoonishly large wooden mallet. As for the entity known as God's strongest soldier, the bird-like creature then proceeded to attack the other members of Mobile Task Force Zeta-66 in a similar fashion, making sure they got to heaven in every sense of the phrase. With multiple recorded instances of containment breaches occurring in relation to the festival in Florence, and happening so frequently, more and more evidence of Director Legge's theory about SCP-001 was being validated. In 1988, the Foundation attempted a different, more pacifistic approach to containing the annual celebration by attempting to cordon off the entrance to the area of Florence where those compelled to attend the festival usually congregated. There was additionally a cover story issued to the public, stating that this was done as a quarantine measure to keep residents away from an area hosting a potentially dangerous infection. For a time, this seemed to be working. The streets were quiet, local residents seemed to be going about their business and paying little mind to the Foundation operatives in the area. That is, until the mind-altering effects of SCP-001-1 took hold. A mass of people estimated to be over 100,000 Florentines charged towards the cordon-off area. This mass of people swept through like a tidal wave breaking through a dam, causing Foundation personnel to be trampled alive. Those that survived the initial rush were attacked by civilians in what seemed to be a coordinated effort to reach the gatherings area for the festival. All Foundation agents in the area were terminated in short order, mercilessly slaughtered and then cannibalized before anything that remained of their bodies was dumped into the Arno River nearby. As well as being evidence of the sheer mental alteration the statue creatures and the festival itself were capable of, for Director Legge this seemed to indicate something further. If an anomaly, SCP-001, was truly responsible for all containment breaches, allowing them to occur in spite of the measures taken to prevent such things happening, then the phenomenon seemed to be occurring specifically to prevent the Foundation from achieving containment of certain SCPs. Legge's theory developed with every passing breach that involved SCP-001-1. In theory, the festival should be an average Tuesday for Foundation staff, a relative walk in the park in order to contain it, if not outright stop it from happening at all. Yet despite all their resources, manpower, and expertise in all things anomalous, the Foundation had been thwarted at every turn. Despite how illogical such occurrences seemed, containment breaches were still occurring at an alarming rate, and perhaps none more so than in relation to SCP-001. The following year, 1989, brought with it the most inexplicable breach yet, and further proof for Director Legge's theory about SCP-001. While the previous breaches were undoubtedly anomalous in nature, each always carrying with the possibility that somehow, despite the low odds, the Foundation missed something. Some human error or previously undiscovered information about the festival could have led to Pasqua's alteration or the arrival of God's strongest soldier. But this time, it was undeniably that a force beyond the scope of the Foundation's understanding was altering reality to prevent them from containing the festival in Florence. An invisible barrier manifested at every entry point to the main area of the anomalous event. Whenever a member of Foundation personnel tried to get in on foot, those that attempted to access the festival area via rappelling out of helicopters instantly caught a blaze and burned to death the moment they touched down on the ground. Any helicopter transports also crashed on their return journey to Site 322, and God's strongest soldier was seen trampling on the wreckage before flapping its arms and flying away. It was following this incident that Legge was promoted to position of Site Director for Site 322 as a replacement for Joseph Pasqua, who was still missing at this time. The newly appointed director was yet to devise his theory that there existed an anomalous cause for all containment breaches. However, during his introductory briefing, he was presented with the file regarding SCP-5770 and the various examples of it not only being uncontainable, but being very good at not being contained. Director Legg asked if some of the more standard methods had been attempted. At this point, the Foundation had tried aerial bombardments of the festival, Scranton reality anchors to counteract whatever anomalous force was preventing containment, even using SCP-682 to clear the area. It had all failed. Figuring out why was now Director Legg's job. All the information of previously failed attempts to contain the festival led Legg to the conclusion that SCP-001 must exist. An unseen phenomenon, the missing piece of the puzzle, the element specifically interfering with the Foundation's efforts. He presented his proposal to the Overseer Council, who were skeptical, to say the least. They posited that the statues and bird mascot creature might be smarter than the latter's outwardly cartoonish nature portrayed. But this is exactly what, to Director Legg, indicated SCP-001 was responsible. He explained that all in attendance at SCP-5770's festival took the event seriously, but the appearance of God's strongest soldier was an abnormality, whose demeanor and tone were drastically different from the rest of the rather cutthroat proceedings. Director Legg explained that the sheer absurdity of this creature seemed to be the result of SCP-001 interfering with their operations. After all, if some other cause was to blame, like an unknown cult attacking Foundation personnel when they attempted to contain the festival, then there would be evidence of that. And Legg would have no reason to suspect that God's strongest soldier was anything more than just a tonally dissonant part of the festival. Of course, Director Legg couldn't prove the existence of SCP-001 based on the presence of one cartoonish bird mascot at a festival. But before long, more and more breaches would start occurring that seemed to further prove that Legg was onto something. There was something else at work, causing containment breaches that put the entirety of the Foundation in jeopardy.
Researcher Martin pushed the deck against the door, hoping it would hold long enough for him to find an alternate escape route. He wasn't thinking about the long term. He couldn't afford to. With the Foundation's global reach, he'd never truly escape them, never be able to make it away, condemned to spend the rest of his life on the run from the organization he'd devoted his life to. It was too overwhelming to even attempt to reckon with that, especially with the pounding of a fist against the door. He scrabbled around, opening windows to try and see if there was a safe way down. Technically, none of this was his fault, at least in his mind. The administrative login information he'd used to access the file shouldn't have been left so easy to find. That was just poor cybersecurity on the Foundation's part. Researcher Martin had been tasked with compiling information on SCP-001, one of the most infamous anomalies ever encountered in the Foundation's long and storied history, or multiple of them at least. What Martin had come to learn was there were numerous entities within the Foundation's files that all acted as proposals for SCP-001. Some were creatures, the typical kind of anomalous entities the Foundation dealt with on a regular basis, but some of the proposals focused on more abstract anomalies, and somehow, those were more existentially terrifying than any evil godlike being bent on destroying reality. Theories about the very source of anomalies themselves, that their very existence might have been predetermined by some otherworldly force. Then there were the other proposals that named parts of the Foundation as the true SCP-001. Those seemed to suck Researcher Martin in like a vortex, dragging him down a deep, dark rabbit hole that made him start to question everything he thought he knew about working for the SCP Foundation, and the one that had toppled him into a full-blown conspiracy-obsessed stupor that there was no coming back from, the Noir Box proposal. The weighted head of a battering ram splintered the wooden surface of the door, spraying fragments over the room. The table propped up to keep it shut toppled under the force of the entry as a squad of shadowy figures in full black combat gear rushed inside. The mobile task force surrounded the cowering researcher, keeping their weapons trained on him. Researcher Martin, pleading for his life, started gesturing to the walls of the room around him that had been plastered with hastily scrawled diagrams and equations. Martin tried desperately to find some concise, easy-to-understand way of explaining to the soldiers what he'd uncovered. They only picked up on a few words like
many worlds hypothesis, and splitting universes, but ultimately they didn't follow what he was saying and weren't sent there to hear him out. All the MTF had been told was that researcher Martin had breached Foundation security and now posed a risk of exposing sensitive information about SCP-001. There was only one path of recourse: termination. However, unbeknownst to them, Dr. Martin was fine. At least a version of him was. One who never learned about the Noir Box proposal for SCP-001 and hadn't gone mad trying to unravel its mysteries. Instead, he was a respected higher-ranking member of the Foundation who was alive and well, in a completely different timeline. The formation of the SCP Foundation has always been shrouded in mystery, with nobody really knowing what the true origin of the organization is, and what is merely just a cover story left in the archives to keep the truth hidden. SCP-001, the Noir Box proposal at least, might hold the answers to the questions surrounding how the Foundation came to be. 3 times over. Known as the Tindalo's Trinity, the file pertaining to this anomaly is buried deep in the SCP Foundation's database, under layers upon layers of encryption and security clearance requirements. It requires someone at the very top level of the Foundation to access, a member of either the Overseer Council or the Foundation's High Command, or Overwatch. But wait, what are those? Aren't they the same thing? Well, yes and no. The exact name of the high-ranking secretive group that runs the Foundation has often been interchangeable, whether they're known as the O5 Council, the Overseer Council, etc. But what if it wasn't just many different names for the same governing body, but actually separate names for alternate versions of the ones who control the SCP Foundation? Allow us to explain. All 3 of these groups, the Overseer Council, High Command, and Overwatch, have come to a consensus that SCP-001 is an anomaly that connects with the Foundation's very origin. They believe that the founder of the SCP Foundation, also known as SCP-001, was anomalous in some way that caused them to interact with time in an unusual fashion. The triumvirate of councils are in agreement that around the time that the SCP Foundation was formed, 3 distinct timelines were generated, given the anomalous nature of the organization's founder. Each of these timelines drastically altered the nature of SCP-001, featuring a different version in each one. In the first, commonly known as Timeline HC, where the Foundation is run by a High Command, SCP-001 was an anomalous human corpse. This timeline's SCP-001 still exhibited all the behavioral characteristics of a normal human being, but could additionally replicate itself at an erratic, uncontrollable rate, usually when performing tasks that could have multiple possible outcomes. SCP-001 in Timeline HC also interacted anachronistically with its environment, passing through solid matter that predated it or would outlast it. So it had to be contained in a room that was constructed before it existed as an anomaly. This timeline's SCP-001 was responsible for conceiving the idea for the SCP Foundation, and was able to promote a significant interest in the organization. However, they were assassinated before the Foundation was officially codified, with the culprits being a version of Mobile Task Force ALP-0, who are believed to have originated from either of the other 2 timelines. While this seems to have been done to deter the Foundation forming in this timeline, it seems to have had the opposite effect. Despite the assassination of SCP-001 occurring before the official formation of the SCP Foundation in Timeline HC, this version of the Foundation was successfully codified by the 13 members of what they referred to as High Command. Given the anomalous circumstances around the death of SCP-001, it provided a catalyst for the organization to immediately establish itself as this timeline's protection against the threat posed by anomalous entities. The body of SCP-001 was placed in the building that had been its childhood home, securing it somewhere that predated them to negate their anomalous properties. This made them the first anomaly contained by Timeline HC's version of the SCP Foundation, posthumously garnering them the official designation of SCP-001. So that's the first of our 3 timelines at play. The events that unfold in the second are considerably different. In this timeline, Timeline OC, the Foundation was initially created by a different SCP-001. This entity, referred to primarily as the Founder, appropriately enough,
was a human being known to possess anomalous temporal abilities. The founder was known to also be immortal, showing no visible signs of aging, and with a resistance to external damage that prevented him from being directly killed. Any injuries he sustained could be healed, but only at the same rate typical of an average human being. The temporal side of his anomalous properties pertained to predicting the future. The founder was able to, with an inarguable level of precision and accuracy, forecast events before they occurred. His foresight, it appeared to the Foundation, was not inciting these events to happen as he predicted them. However, everything he ever predicted would occur became an inevitability, impossible to delay, avert, or alter through any means. During the events of Timeline OC, and as his preferred nickname implies, the founder was the sole figure responsible for establishing this version of the SCP Foundation. In this course of events, the O5 Council of this timeline were known as the Overseer Council. It was, however, while he was in the process of establishing the organization that things started to go awry. Whether he was able to predict this occurrence or not is unknown, although it seems to have corresponded with the MTF-ALP-0 assassination of SCP-001 in the other timeline, Timeline HC. In Timeline OC, at the same time as the assassination in Timeline HC, the founder began to exhibit his anomalous temporal properties in front of the original members of Overseer Council. However, it should also be noted that there was no recorded presence of MTF-ALP-0 in Timeline OC. Believing the founder to be a potential danger to the Foundation they had all helped to create, the founding Overseer Council classified him as an anomalous threat. They immediately devised a set of containment measures for the founder, now designating him as SCP-001, the first anomaly contained by this timeline's version of the Foundation. He was placed within a standard humanoid containment cell and given regular meals, while personnel were forbidden to communicate with him. Given his role in establishing the Foundation in this version of events, SCP-001 is naturally in favor of containing and analyzing anomalies. However, not when that includes him, and insisted that he be released. According to one of his predictions for forthcoming events, he requested to be allowed to build a device, but refused to elaborate on the intended purpose of it. SCP-001 even refused to allow other members of Foundation personnel to construct the device on his behalf for testing purposes. The third of these timelines is referred to as Timeline OW, wherein the leading body of the Foundation are known as Overwatch. Here, just like the previous iterations of its history, the description of SCP-001 and their role in forming the SCP Foundation differs. In this timeline, SCP-001 is an anomaly that consists of two distinct parts. The first of these is a figure not dissimilar from the founder. Referred to as SCP-001-1, this person is also a functionally immortal human who doesn't age and can't heal rapidly from damage. SCP-001-1 also advocates for securing and analyzing anomalies. However, this includes himself, as he doesn't object to his own containment, or that of the second component of this SCP-001. Known as SCP-001-A, this device is capable of accurately calculating any and all possible outcomes of any event that is input into it. Unlike the founder, who seemed to possess a foresight able to predict the only inevitable outcome of the future, SCP-001-A is able to account for the possibility of multiple potential futures, even down to accounting for how its own predictions could potentially influence or alter outcomes. In layman's terms, at least one of the eventualities predicted by SCP-001-A will always be accurate, unless the predictions are to do with its own future, or the future of SCP-001-1. In this instance, the device will always produce one of two assumptions that are incorrect. Either that SCP-001-1 was killed after an assassination attempt and never constructed SCP-001-A, but that's impossible after all. SCP-001-A exists. It's already been made in this timeline. The other incorrect prediction it can give is that SCP-001-1 also exhibits the same anomalous properties as the prediction machine, more akin to the founder, and that SCP-001-A was never constructed in the first place. But again, that can't be right, in this timeline anyway. According to records within Timeline OW, their version of the Founder, who is of course SCP-001-1, encountered a version of Mobile Task Force ALP-0 from one of the other timelines. They presented the Founder of the OW timeline with detailed blueprints for the construction of SCP-001-A. The device's completion coincided with the assassination in Timeline HC, and the corresponding anomalous incident in Timeline OC. After this point, MTF-ALP-0 departs from Timeline OW. This version of the SCP Foundation is then created to study the device, SCP-001-A, with this Founder and a group of his close friends, who would become this Foundation's Overwatch. Following this initial research group's discovery of other anomalous phenomenon that threatened the rest of society, the team's goal expanded to research anomalies and protect the world from the danger they posed. However, the rest of the Overwatch began to age at a natural rate. While the Founder didn't recognize this, he volunteered to be contained and studied, thus becoming a component of this timeline's SCP-001. Stepping back and looking at all of these timelines, there seems to be a number of marked similarities, particularly relating to how the Foundation was established and how a figure, usually the one who founded the organization, possessed anomalous means of interacting with time and temporality. Under normal circumstances, interaction between alternate timelines should be impossible. But the preservation of information about all three on the SCP Foundation's database has somehow enabled all three timelines to communicate with each other. Through exchanging intelligence via their own versions of the database, all three iterations of the Foundation across the three timelines have learned that almost all of the anomalies they have encountered since being established are exclusive to their own timeline. There are a total of 17 anomalies that have been confirmed to exist across the three timelines. But there is a concerning factor in all this: the presence of an anachronistic military group referring to itself as MTF-ALP-0. This Mobile Task Force's direct involvement in the events of both Timeline HC, where they assassinated SCP-001, and Timeline OW, where they provided schematics for SCP-001-A, raises an awful lot of questions. This MTF had to be acting on orders of the Foundation, but which version in which timeline? The consensus among the leading committees of all three, the High Command, Overseer Council, and Overwatch, is that at some unknown date in the future, each of them will inevitably send their own version of MTF-ALP-0 back in time to alter the Foundation's past. And in a sense, they've already done it, and seen how this altered the circumstances in order to inadvertently create the Foundation. But this poses the risk of one of these timelines overriding another, thus meaning all information garnered by alternate iterations of the Foundation could be lost. So, putting their heads together, these Foundation leading committees come to the conclusion that they need to attempt to merge all three timelines. And it seems the way to do so is using the device that Timeline OC's founder wanted to build, and that Timeline OW's founder was able to construct. This device is how this proposal for SCP-001 was given its nickname, the Noir Box. The intention of the Noir Box is to shunt all three timelines into a stable joint path, like turning loose strands into a single length of twine. As such, the leading committees of all three different timelines have agreed to share their intel on how each of them can safely create their own Noir Boxes, and all three will be used to merge the timelines. Every member of High Command, the Overseer Council, and Overwatch sign off on it. But whether or not the plan works is another matter. The fabric of time is delicate, and one wrong move could tear everything apart. Now check out SCP-001 Noir Box Proposal Hated Caesar and SCP-001 Overlord Censure for more.